G'day and welcome to another video with Better Picks. Hope this finds you well. Today's video I want to look at some of the basic editing tools that are available within Adobe Lightroom. Now these tools are also available in Lightroom Classic as well as Adobe Camera Raw, so this is really easy to transfer over to those platforms if they're the ones that you prefer using. Alright, so the first tools that we're going to look at are exposure and contrast, and exposure really is just an adjustment of brightness. And the nice thing about looking at the panels that we're looking at is that they are just sliders, and there's really only two options. You can decrease or you can increase the slider. You know that we're decreasing and increasing because we've got either a plus or a minus on that numerical value just on the right hand side there. If we go to the left, it goes into the negative, and if we go to the right, it goes into the positive. And exposure, exactly the same with exposure within photography, is a decrease or increase in brightness. Now, as I mentioned, there are other ways to make adjustments to exposure, but we're just looking at a few tools as an introduction for today. All right, so exposure, decrease in brightness. Now, just looking at this image straight out of the camera, you can see that it is a little bit bright, and certainly some of those snow caps, those snowy parts of the image, it looks as though we've lost a little bit of detail. Now, we are going to recover that detail, but the first step that I'm going to make is just to decrease exposure, and I'm also going to increase contrast, just to make the image a little bit more punchy. So you can see as I've increased that contrast, we'll go to extreme and increase it a lot. You can see the blacks become blacker, or the shadow areas become more pronounced, and the brighter areas become more pronounced as well. So we're just going to add a little bit of contrast for now and drop a little bit of exposure, and you can see straight away that has improved the image and helped to make some changes. All right, what we're going to do now is look at highlights and shadows. So highlights, as the name suggests, it looks after adjustments with the brighter parts of the image. You can drop the highlights down. Again, to the left is in the negative, and you can see those brighter parts of the image are being affected. The darker parts aren't. And if we go up to the right, you can see that the brighter parts are becoming brighter and the shadow areas aren't changing at all. So in this case, because the brighter areas are a little bit too bright, we're just going to drop those highlights right down, and you can see that has absolutely helped bring back some of the detail in those highlight areas. So, and along with adjusting the highlights, we're also going to adjust the shadow areas. And as I showed earlier, if we go to the right, those darker areas become brighter, and to the left, they become darker. Now, this image has great potential to be quite dramatic as a landscape, so I'm actually going to drop those shadow areas as well. You can see those darker areas just dropping down in brightness really well. That's great. All right, so that's everything that we're going to do on the light panel, so we can minimize that if we want. The next thing we're going to do is have a look at the color panel, and there's two groups of adjustments that I'm going to demonstrate within this panel. So the first one is temperature and tint, and that looks at the nature of the color. So does the image look warm or does it look cool? If we take, for example, our temperature and we go to the left, it cools the image right down. And if we go to the right, it warms the image up. So you can make those adjustments depending, obviously, on the type of image and what sort of feel you want the image to have. Now, with the tint, if we go to the left, we get a cyan or a green tint. And if we go to the right, we get a more magenta or purple tint. So usually temperature and tint are used in combination with each other to try and deal with any color correction that's needed, or as part of the process of giving an image a look, or what's often called color grading. So for today, for this image, because I want it to be closer to a true representation of what the landscape looked like, I'm going to make those color adjustments to correct any issues that I might see. For example, I don't want there to be any warmth in a cold environment, and the scene certainly didn't look blue. So what we're just going to try and do, just by hovering that temperature slider back and forward, just getting a neutral color that we would expect to see in a snowy mountain region like this, and those adjustments of temperature and tint are going to help us to do that, and that looks pretty good. All right, vibrance and saturation. Now, vibrance and saturation look at the intensity of the color. Primary difference between the two: vibrance will only affect the colors that Lightroom deems to be under in terms of saturation or intensity, whereas saturation will affect the entire image, adding equal amounts of intensity to all parts of the image, regardless of what those colors look like. So if we take vibrance right up to maximum, you can see it has a dramatic effect on that color. And if we take saturation up to maximum, you can see it also has a dramatic effect. So depending on the look that you want to achieve will affect or will determine how you use that vibrance and saturation. So vibrance, I'm going to go up to around 30 as a starting point, and that's usually where I start with vibrance. And saturation, just a little bit of an increase, about 8, just as a starting point. All right, so vibrance, I'm just going to again float back and forward with that slider just to see where I'm happy with it. And I'm actually going to push it a little bit further up to about 40. And I'm pretty happy with that. That looks good. So the colors aren't unnaturally intense, but they certainly have a better sort of intensity to them, and certainly closer to what I experienced while I was in this environment. The thing to keep in mind is that everything is dependent on your starting point with what your settings are for your color profiles in camera. Now I have my color profiles set fairly flat with minimal contrast because I know that I'm going to want to make adjustments in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw afterwards. And by keeping the image fairly flat and low in contrast, it means that I can maximize all detail. As you can see, I've been able to retain the detail in that those highlights on the snow, and it means that I've got plenty of information to work with. Also, if you look at the histogram and the blacks or the dark areas in this image, I haven't crushed the black, so there's still detail in all parts of the image, which is a really great outcome. Excellent. So that's the color panel. Those adjustments have been done on, which is temperature and tint, and also vibrance and saturation. All right, the next one that I'm going to go down to is effects. And effects have got a few different options, but the one that we're going to look at today, the last one, is vignetting. So if we just drop down, as the name suggests, it just brings a little bit of darkness around the outside of the image. I'm also going to bring the midpoint, which is the distance from the middle of the image to the outer part where that vignette starts to take effect. The roundness, I want it nice and round, and I want a really strong feather because I don't want there to be any hard edges with that vignette. Now, obviously there isn't any hard edges, but I just want to smooth it out as much as possible. Now, there's absolutely other ways to create a vignette within an image, and the most common one that people would know of is through masking. We're going to keep that for another video on another day, but I just wanted to, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, just approach this as a basic introduction to some of the adjustments that I generally make on images, and that's why I've gone with the vignette edit in that way. So just using those sliders, once again, left or right. Left is a reduction, right is an increase, and that's for all of those sliders, and we can see the effect that it has provided for that image if you're wanting to darken the outside of the image just a little bit. Now, the reason that this was traditionally done was to really try to contain the viewer's attention to whatever part of the image that you're trying to keep their attention on. Now, with this image, I'm really wanting people to focus on that central part of the image. So using vignette and darkening those edges helps to keep the viewer's attention into that central part of the image, which is exactly where I want it. Now, for this image, it lends itself really well to those adjustments because it is naturally dark on the outer parts anyway, but by adding a vignette, it just increases that containment of the viewer's attention, and for me, I think it works really well with this image. We're just going to go back up to light, and I'm just going to decrease that exposure just a little bit more. I just want to make sure that we've got all of that detail in the snowy highlights, which we do, which is great. You can see in that histogram, it is leaning a little bit on the left side, but as I mentioned earlier, it is an image that I wanted to give a dark sort of moody feel to, and I think that works really well. So as you can see, there's some fantastic tools in Lightroom. Even just working on the edit panel, there's obviously many more tools, but this video's intention was to just give us a gentle introduction to some of those edit tools. Exposure and contrast, adjusting the brightness and intensity or contrast of the image. Highlights and shadows, taking a greater, more specific control over the brighter and the darker areas of the image. Looking at the temperature and tint, so making sure that we're color correcting this image so that it is a better representation of real life. And then vibrance and saturation so that we can look at the intensity of the color. Again, bringing back that color intensity that we didn't capture initially in the original file due to those flatter color profiles. All right, and lastly, the effects, looking at vignette, just slightly darkening the outside of the image to contain people's view within Lightroom. So these are just some entry tools or essential tools that I use for most of my image editing within Lightroom. They're tools that I use almost every single time, and I find them really effective to help get the images edited in a way and presented in a way that I want to present them. Hope you found this video helpful. Thanks always for stopping by. Any questions are welcome in the comments below. And as always, we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.